I started a podcast in the year 2020. There aren't many dumber things you can do.
How do you think the American dream has changed?
Whoa, yeah, it's a loaded question. What are the two most important things in your life? Health and family. Congratulations, money pays for both.
It's the house, the family, the girl, the kids. Yeah. They have given up on all of that.
The last year, for example, has been the most challenging of my life.
That sobers you up like that.
We're the post 9/11 era. We're the post 2008 era. Now we're also the COVID era. The millennials, Gen Zs, like this is what we know. Yeah. It's like death.
Oh, why did the kids say to America? I was like, have you talked to them?
You bought your house for $20,000 in 1981. It's worth $2 million now. I just paid $2 million in fucking interest for the rest of my life for college. Of course I'm not happy.
All you have to say, this is the greatest country in the world, which, by the way, I believe in.
Yeah.
But your pitch is weak.
I'm looking at somebody who is representing that the American dream does in fact still exist.
That's where I'm gonna close the loop on us being narcissists. And
one of the things I need to accept is that I am probably not going to have a serious relationship at any point during this run.
We don't need the motivation of a girl or a newborn to work our asses off.
We do have the motivation of wanting that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no shit. Yeah.
Julian, you have done some really stupid shit in your life, like a lot. This might be the stupidest thing you've ever done.
Hey guys, my name is Sagnik. If this is your first time here, I live in New York City and I work in media. In this channel, I like to talk to creators, entrepreneurs, and people who are driving culture. In this episode, I sat down with Julian Dorey. I know a lot of people in the podcasting space, but I'm usually attracted to folks who have staked something. Julian left a pretty successful career in New York City finance to pursue this, and since then he has created an insane empire talking to people from all walks of life about politics, culture, conspiracy theories, you name it. I live in Manhattan, he lives in New Jersey, so I just drove up to Hoboken, and it was so interesting because he lives in an apartment and his studio and his bedroom is right next to each other, and that's all this guy does. He's so obsessed with his craft. He wakes up, films the videos, the guests come in his house, he talks to them, records the podcast, goes to the editing bay, and after he's done, he sleeps in the room right next to it. That's obsession, and I'm so stoked to see someone who is this into their craft. Julian fascinates me because he has heterodox views on all things politics, culture, and life in general. He doesn't subscribe to any belief because he is part of a political party or whatever. So we sat down to talk about American dream, why kids don't believe in America anymore, owning a house, having kids, having family, the presidential elections, women, dating. We went all over the place and I could not control it because when you have someone this fascinating in front of you, I just want to talk to him about everything and not just like podcasting in general. Anywho, before we start the video, it would be great if you all could subscribe. I'm trying to get to 10K and the goal is once I hit 10K to talk much more about my personal journey. I'm an immigrant here in the States. I moved here about 8 years ago and I worked in politics, media. I've worked with people like Tucker Carlson, Sagar and Jetty, Peter Santinello, you know, a bunch of people who you've seen my channel, and a lot of politicians in DC as well. So I have a lot of stories to tell, but I have promised myself to only do that after I have hit 10K. So yeah, subscribe, like, let people know that I am making videos, and enjoy my conversation with Julian Dorey. I know a lot of people who work in New York City finance, currently an ex.
Sorry to hear that.
Most people who decide to leave New York City finance eventually somehow make their way to Greenwich, Connecticut or something like that and start their families over there.
Yeah.
You decided to move back with your parents and start a podcast. A, why? And B, talk to me about that time.
Because I'm an idiot? I don't know. It's probably the dumbest thing I could do, but here we are. So, yeah, there was a lot going on. When I got out of college, I was very green in the sense that it was like, oh, well, you know, I went to college. Now I got to go get a good job, something respectable, and then go from there. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I had never taken the time to, like, think about myself and what I wanted and, more importantly, like, what I was good at, where my passions were. It was just like, all right, we got to go get the job. So I get a job on Wall Street. I was hired by a good friend of mine's father who I had gotten really tight with while I was still in college. He's the man. He's like another dad to me to this day. Loved working for him. But what I ended up figuring out as I got into the job is that the job itself I didn't like. I mean, I mean, this guy's known me 10 minutes. Picture me in a suit on Wall Street every day. Like, it just doesn't fly. So I think they kind of felt that, but like, I still did a good job. Like, I have a good work ethic, so I worked hard. And the way that business on Wall Street worked, because like people say Wall Street, and that can mean
Nebulous.
100 million different things. Our part of Wall Street, it was the private bank and investment group at Merrill. So we handled ultra high net worth individuals, handled some of their companies as well. Some of those would be public companies. We'd handle things like their 10b5-1s, or even something very simple like a 401k, which is like an excuse to basically be inside the company. Very cool. But, you know, like in that business, you come out of college, you grind like a dog for 4 or 5 years, you make no money. Your suits are from, you know, the knockoff rack, but you make it look okay. And then if you do a great job, you get the offer. And so my boss gave me the offer late summer 2019, and it was a very generous offer. I would have been somebody of means for the first time in my life. I'd never lived anything but paycheck to paycheck. But I knew when he went to give it, number one, that it was coming because he was been telling me for a little while, and number two, that I was going to have to say no. And that was really hard for me because the actual process of saying no to someone you care about, difficult.
It's brutal,
Yeah. But I think a part of him, as much as it hurt him,
he knew that.
He saw it coming for sure. Like, I was always a square peg in a round hole in there. He'd have to like straighten me out sometimes. Like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, but yeah, we got to that, and I was very fortunate to work for him because he wasn't like, okay, well, you got to figure it out and leave. He was like, yo, the company's still paying you your check so you can pay your rent. You're doing a great job. Stay here while you're figuring your stuff out.
Yeah.
And, you know, you work for me, keep doing what you're doing, and whatever help I can give you to move on to a new industry, which is what I was looking to do, we'll do. Because I'd always had, like, these side LLCs out of college, work with my buddies, the Laxamana brothers for a while there, and some other people, where, you know, it was always more creative driven, you know, where I was like the creative director of something. Yeah. And so I knew I wanted to get into marketing, and I knew my resume was weird. And so I had no ego about it. I was like, yo, I'm going to go for jobs paying 38 grand a year in New York City. Don't care. I'll go prove myself. No worries. Money's not a thing. As long as I'm not homeless, we're good. And I was still getting my ass kicked on the job trail with that. Not because companies didn't think, like, you know, I could be a good candidate. It was just like, it's too much work for them to figure out whether or not a banker is going to be a good candidate versus someone who had a marketing degree in college and is coming out fresh with no expectations. That's easier.
Yeah. And
I fully understand that. Yeah. It was definitely, some of it was very humbling, even more than I thought it would be. And I thought it was going to be very humbling. And there were a couple in there, well, one in particularly that really stuck in my craw because, like, you talk about the people who doubt you and treat you like shit just because they can and they want to. And it's like, I absolutely use that stuff as motivation. But in that time, I still was doing some of my side media work, you know, with the LLC and stuff. And so I went to go do a quick media shoot for my buddy Ty it was January 26, 2020. And I remember that day because it was the day Kobe had died. And it was a very weird day. But
it was a Sunday, I think.
Yep, it was a Sunday. Yeah. And so he ran this whole lacrosse company where he's training all these high school kids and like high middle school kids. And so they were filming all kinds of content that day with hundreds of kids. And he wanted me to interview him at the end. It's like, okay, whatever. And he's like, yo, like, because we're boys. He's like, you know, some of the stuff I fucked up in my life, bring it up. Whatever you want. Like, just like it's you and me talking. I'm like, okay. So late that night, they wrapped up, and at like 9 o'clock, we put the cameras on and everything, dim out the whole like industrial warehouse that we were working in where they were playing lacrosse and stuff all day. And, you know, we sat there for like 35 minutes and really went back and forth. And when we wrapped, they turned the lights on, and there were like 35 people, 25, 35 people sitting there, like clapping, like, wow, that was amazing, or whatever. I was like, oh. And so a bunch of these people came up to me, and they're like, bro, do you have a podcast? I'm like, no, I don't have a podcast. They're like, you need a podcast. And people had told me this for a long time, But it was always like
in the passing, yeah.
I'm like, what the fuck am I gonna do with? Who wants to listen to me? I'm not gonna have a podcast. Shut the fuck up with this. But that day, like I said, was weird because I was a huge Kobe fan. It was just bizarre, and I was filming this in South Jersey, living in North Jersey. So 10:30 at night, I drive back north. It's like a 2-hour drive. And I did it in silence, and I was just thinking about my life because I was like, this is where I am now. Like, this is what I'm at. I got nothing on the job trail going. I feel totally lost. I'm in my mid-20s. I'm at that quarter-life crisis. Like, I just turned down, to me, what is a lot of money. And I had no regret about that, but I'm like, aren't you going to, like, have a plan on the other side, though? That's fine, but, like, what are we doing here? And I thought to myself, I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. If I did a podcast, I would do it right. I'd have all the right equipment and stuff. I don't know any of this stuff. We'll figure it out. So I started this like Saturday afternoon hobby for like the next 4 Saturdays before the pandemic, where I'd go to B&H and learn everything there. And then I'd go home and Google it all night on just Saturdays. And March 4th, 2020, I hit the order button on some of the stuff you still hear. This thing, that thing, the Zoom thing. Not that computer, I couldn't afford that. But like a lot of this stuff, and that camera right there, actually, the one we still use for the master shot, and a few other cameras and some other stuff. And if you remember, the market started finally like reacting to COVID February 24th.
Yep.
And then that whole week, the 24th to 28th, the 28th was a real line in the sand because I'll never forget that day. I had a meeting with a client in New York City. They were in a skyscraper right by Grand Central Station. So I get there early. I'm there like an hour early. So I go down into the bottom of Grand Central because I need to kill time. It's cold outside, and I'm taking phone calls because today the Dow Jones is down like 1,600 points or something. It was the first
wild time.
like that whole week it was going down, but that day it was like
free fall. Yeah.
So we're like, fuck. So I'm on the phone with clients freaking out. We had them set up pretty good, but people are still like, oh my God, what is this COVID thing? What's going to happen? And I'm standing there on the Bluetooth with my phone in my hand, and I have like the S&P and the Dow right here, and I would just look at the S&P and the Dow, look up, listen to the client in the ear, look at the S&P and Dow, look up, listen to the client in the ear, and I got off the last call with one of my clients. And I'm sitting there, I'm still looking at the chart, and I'm looking back up, and I see, regular day, thousands of people. I see people of every race, creed, and religion, every occupational background, status, whatever, in Grand Central Station, walking around, buying food in the concourse right there, walking to the bathroom to take a piss on top of each other. Everything's normal. And I remember just looking there, and I'm like, we're going to be okay. Yeah, we're going to be good. Nah, this is nothing. We're fine. And then that was, long story short, that was the last time I was in New York for 11 months. So March 4th, a few days later, I order all the equipment, and then the stock market's in free fall. I'm still working on Wall Street. Yeah. So we're very active. Even though I'm trying to find another industry right now, all the focus goes towards the clients. Like, that's the job. And so I totally forget. I order everything. And then the first day of quarantine, Friday, March 13th, I get a notification. Your equipment has arrived downstairs. I'm like, what? Oh, fuck.
Forgot I did that.
Oh, my God. I go downstairs from my apartment. I bring it back up. I put it on the couch. I stand back, and I look at this couch, and I'm like, Julian, you have done some really stupid shit in your life, like a lot. This might be the stupidest thing you've ever done. You have no money. You just spent pretty much anything you have on this right here. Like, what are you doing? And then I don't know if it was 15 seconds, 30 seconds, or 60 seconds, but there was a period of like, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, where I'm just staring at this, and then suddenly I just went, well, all my job opportunities just dried up overnight, so fuck it. I guess if not now, when? And I started working that day pretty much full time on it because that was a Friday. My boss called me a couple days later. I think it was like Monday. And he's like, hey, because I'd been planning on leaving like the next month, like for sure, no matter what. Because again, some jobs were heating up and I was ready to roll. And he was like, listen, why don't you just hang around till we get back to the office? Like, because we thought we were going back to the office in like April or May.
Yeah.
And, collect the check, because like we're set up really well. You did a great job, and the week and a half leading up to this, everyone's pretty good. Like we were really, as far as like the performance as investment managers in my career, I worked for one of the best. That COVID period was our best showing ever. Like we were so set up for that. People were dipped in shit like the whole time. It was really cool. So that was nice because that ended up being the end. But I was like, okay. And so he's like, I'll probably have like an hour of work for you to do a day. So that's literally what it was. It would be up. We'd check all the stuff. I'd run a couple reports on things. It would be like, are we good? Yeah, we're good. And I'd spend all day and all night in that apartment working until 2, 3 a.m. in the morning on how to do a podcast and how to set it up. And so I spent the next 6 months. Well, the other important call that happened was around the same time my dad calls me. And he goes, hey, this is when they're saying 2 weeks to stop the curve.
Yeah.
He's like, this shit ain't going to be 2 weeks. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Every channel's saying it's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He goes, no. They love this stuff. This is going to be a year. He's like, do not re-sign your lease. I had a lease coming up April 1st. He's like, do not re-sign that. He's like, just come down here, wait it out. We'll figure it out later. I was like, all right, that's fine. So I didn't re-sign it. That was a huge move because then I get down there on April 1st. My dad looks at the equipment and he's like, what the fuck is that? And I'm like, I don't know. And he goes, well, if not now, when? And he pointed at the back room and he's like, go for it.
In my podcast, I usually ask people about nerdy, like podcast back-end type of questions, like how they got started and what's their business and all that stuff. But for some reason, I did not want to do that with you because I'm way more fascinated by your brain and the stuff you're thinking about and what you're asking your guests about. So when you said that part about when the market was kind of free falling and you looked up and you looked around and everyone was just going about their life day to day and somehow you told yourself that we're going to be okay. Like you kind of zoomed out and kind of had things in perspective.
I was wrong, but yeah.
I mean, we went through a lot of things, but worse things have happened. And maybe for our generation, which has kind of seen the blunt of, I don't know, post 9/11, 2008, and then came up during COVID. A lot of people had to graduate during COVID, and they have faced the effects of that in their working life, in their relationships, and all that stuff. So, yes, we are kind of like that generation. But at the same time, if I ask you today, from that time to today, how do you think the American dream has changed, and how do you define it today?
Whoa, yeah, it's a loaded question. So, yeah, to your point, by the way, before I go directly at that, we were okay. You're right. Not everyone died. It was obviously awful in New York City there for a couple months as far as like deaths and people not knowing how to treat this. But we did come out of it okay. It's just the social implications of what ended up happening, which we can all argue about politically what went on there, changed our world forever.
Yeah,
forever.
No doubt.
And to go right into your question, yeah, I feel like, especially with the internet, the American dream is still alive. But the American dream maybe isn't as wide in what you can do in traditional business per se. Thinking more, I mean, everything's on the internet, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like stuff that's not purely 100%, online based, be it content or strictly drop shipping new products and shit online. Like, I think that's thinner, and I think that the margins between the upper class and the now totally dwindling and moving towards lower class, middle class, the gap there is getting so wide that it is harder for the American dream to exist. That said, I'm looking at somebody who is representing that the American dream does in fact still exist. You came to this country, 6 years ago, 7 years ago?
8 years ago.
8 years ago, right? You have your own business that is already successful that you two are building here on the side of also having successful jobs during the day. And like it can be done. I think where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, shit, I started a podcast in the year 2020. There aren't many dumber things you can do. And like, I'm alive right now.
Yeah.
I have my own place. So that should tell you like there's an ability for a work ethic to rise up. But also, I have to point out for at least my own example, None of this ever happens if my parents don't let me move back in, and my dad doesn't say like go for it in the back room, right? I couldn't afford rent for studio space or whatever. I also like started having health problems back then too. It was happening right before the pandemic, and then got bad right when the pandemic started. So like my body was all out of whack all the time. There are things that would have never happened if I didn't have the luxury of like parents who let you come back into their house when you're fucking 26 years old. You know, so I think there are people out there who it's possible, but it's harder for them even than it was for me.
I mean, if you are like speaking from like a pure definition point of view, I think American Dream is defined as you being able to have a job, make a living, retire, and then your kids will live a better life than you were able to yourself.
I like that. Yeah.
Right? So like that's like a pure first principle definitional point of view. And today, I think the reason people always talk about the American Dream being under a threat is because they don't see that as a possibility, and that applies to every step of that process. That applies to getting married, that applies to having a house, that applies to having a family, that applies to sending your child to school and affording childcare, all that stuff. So like I think like that in its core is what people are talking about, while also I will say that at the same time, yes, people like me, like you, like hyper ambitious people will always figure out a way in every economy how to make shit happen. So I think that will never go away. And for those kind of people, the US is the best place to actually make stuff happen. But for the majority, the default setting kind of people, I think it's getting harder and harder. And I talk about politics a lot. I work in politics kind of. I lived in DC. I worked in DC for 6 years. And I think my problem is with either sides when they don't want to address those core fundamental issues while at the same time opining about stuff which I don't really care about.
Yeah.
On either side.
Yeah. I think we're fighting a battle of two things at the same time, which are the opposite, and they're both bad.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is when we were growing up, again, like at least here, like because I was a kid in America, I guess you weren't, but here, the way people talked about things was it was the plan, right?
Yeah.
You grow up, you play some sports, you make some friends, you go to school. When you get to high school, suddenly you have to care about community service because guess what? Colleges care about that. You work hard in school, you try to get some grades, you go to the good college, you get in there, you make sure you party, but you really make sure you graduate. You come out of college, you get a respectable job, you start figuring out when you're 23, 24, get yourself set up by 25, find the girl, marry her, have her engaged at 27, marry her at 29, have a couple kids at 31, be making $200,000 by 35, and then when you're 40, you can feel like you're important as you're an executive VP playing golf on Saturday morning with the boys just to get away from the wife who doesn't even want to look at you anymore. And then somehow you flash forward through your 40s and 50s, rise up, hopefully towards the top of something. Maybe you're lucky enough to make $500,000-$600,000 a year. You put all this into your 401k. You have enough for $10 million at that time, but inflation has fucked you the whole way through. You buy an extra house down in Florida. You look at the fucking sun and you wait to die.
Did you prepare that? Oh
like that. Like
so
I've thought about that so much before, so I'm sure it's like prepared in my head.
Yeah, dude.
But like that was the plan.
Yeah.
On the other end of that, though, the generation that is coming up now, the millennials and Gen Z, who have been coming up, especially in the post-financial crisis era, have seen the opposite end of that, which is that, oh my God, everyone's living a lot longer. There are a lot more boomers than us, so now there's a generational divide there because they're saying we're going to be paying for them forever. Yeah. Our taxes are through the roof on our relative to our income because we're making a lot less because inflation's crazy. By the way, they convinced us in this American dream since World War II to all get college educations no matter what, even if we are majoring in cocaine and pussy at some horrible college. Sorry, I'm from Jersey. But like, you know, that gets us nothing, doesn't even get us through for the first job. You know, you got people who are saying, hi, welcome to Starbucks, who have a 4-year degree. And I understand why they're angry at that because you know what now happens? Now they don't have money for a kid. Now they have social media and all these dopamine whatevers that are stopping them from focusing on their goals, which, you know, we got to take responsibility for that. Yeah. But it's like this like planned invasion, if you will, against our generations. And we're coming up in a time of war and precipitously, no, that's the wrong word, a continuously poor, persistently, yes, economy since 2008 where we have seen the wealth gap go like that. And the rich, you know, we're seeing 25-year-old billionaires now and then 25-year-olds who can't even afford a basic apartment, right? And are living in their mom's basement, not even getting a job with their 4-year degree. And so there's a lack of hope. It's this downtime in our current world and specifically within this country where not only have people said, yo, fuck that whole plan I laid out because it's not exciting enough for Instagram and I feel like there's more to life, but they can't even get the opposite of it, which is horrible. That like or like that's what they're living in. It's this weird like dichotomy that's happening, and I think people are more depressed than ever, you know, and obviously people talk about all different things in society that are contributing to this, including like, you know, people talk about pharma pushing people to just get on a pill to take care of their problems and stuff. I think almost sometimes that's like unfair. I think people are running towards things because they feel like they're going to get an answer somewhere else because they can't find it in their own life. And, you know, maybe there's a doctor on the other end who's a little too excited with their prescription pad, you know, and that's a problem. But we have these two worlds clashing, and it's like the one wasn't good enough and people want more so that, you know, they can brag about it to their friends, but they can't even get, you know, the world they're living in is, you know, we're seeing more and more people who are antisocial at age 30 forget being married or something like that. Like, I'm not saying you got to be married at 30. I'm not, right? But like, I'm ambitious. I'm out there. I'm being social. I'm around people. I'm building relationships. Eventually, I want to do that, though.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm chasing something as an entrepreneur. There are a lot of people I can think of who are my age who got nothing going for them. And then there's also people who tried to stick to the plan. And there's people who are happy too, to be clear. But like I see two ends of the spectrum as well, where there's people who do stick to the plan and they settle. You know, they settle for this girl. They settle for this job. They settle for saying no to their dreams and stuff. And that's where people have to have an honest conversation with themselves, because I don't think that's the world doing it to them.
I saw this somewhere where like, why are all these Gen Z kids buying $40 sweatshirts or $60 sweatshirt, whatever? And someone who I was talking to was like, because they don't really give a shit about saving money to buy a house. They don't see a future which they want to aspire to, which would then lead them to make wise choices or whatever that may be. So they're like, okay, so that's not going to happen anyway, so might as well go YOLO right now and live my life like full on dopamine with TikTok, with Instagram, with all of the, I don't know, like vices around me or whatever. So I think like that's the core shift which has happened, which is like the future which your parents told you to aspire to. My parents did, even though I'm from a different country. Right now is in the States particularly is so out of reach for day-to-day normal people. They are saying, fuck it, let's ball today.
Yep.
So I think, and even in my age group, I see a lot of people, especially the ones whose parents are not writing their checks for their rents or whatever, they have like given up on all of that. And when I say all of that, that includes the house, the family, the girl, the kids, and all of that. So there's like a level of nihilism, which kind of rubs me the wrong way, especially because I know what not living in this country looks like. Especially, and I've lived in like all the different ends of spectrum. Like I grew up in the UK, but at the same time, I've lived a chunk of my life in India as well, where I've seen like what not having anything looks like. So I have a lot of like perspective when I look at people who are barely scraping by in the States as well. While not invalidating what they're going through, I know what not having that looks like, right? Yeah. So however, I'm like super stoked about the fact that there are a lot of people in the States who are actually barely getting by, but they have a fridge, they have electricity, they have a phone. If they get in an accident, maybe healthcare is out of reach, but like I don't think they will like die bleeding on the streets. So there's a lot that I'm grateful for in this country, but at the same time, I don't want them to be like, oh, I'm grateful because like I don't live in a third world country, right? Because like that's not their reality. Their reality is that their parents had a much better life than they're living right now, and right now there is nothing to aspire to.
That's right.
Right? So those people having like a 40 grand job in New York City and they can live here, they have to like live somewhere way deep in the Bronx and come to Manhattan. Those are the people I think about a lot because I like, you know, like I work in the city and like you're surrounded by these kind of people who are running the city, but they don't live here and they're like barely scraping by. So I have like some sort of like weird guilt when
I see what you're saying.
And I don't know how to like parse that out yet because I have friends who are from all different like ends of the economic spectrum per se. So when I look at the ones who are like barely getting by And I moved to the country with $300 in my pocket 10 years ago. And somehow here and there, a little bit of luck, a little bit of work, I figured out life.
$200. That's it.
Yeah.
Where'd you arrive?
Dulles in Washington D.C.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was a weird time in my life. I landed in Dulles, and the first I had no money, so the apartment was not an apartment. It was like a B&B for international travelers or whatever in Anacostia, which is like the highest crime-ridden space in Northeast.
Nice.
And
Toughening up quick.
the cab ride was so funny because like we passed the White House, we passed the Capitol, and I was like, oh shit, I'm in Capitol, the U.S., whatever.
No, the fuck you're not.
And then eventually we crossed the bridge and we arrived we like drove past a bus station where someone was shooting themselves up with a syringe or whatever. I was like, wow, how did this change happen really quickly?
Yeah.
So my day one was witnessing that inequity in real time.
Yeah.
And that sobers you up like that.
Yes, it does.
Right? Because like you want to romanticize America. You want to romanticize the American dream. As a 20-something guy who wants to build companies, do a lot of work, and like live life in general, like you want something to aspire to, but I'm also like really pragmatic. Right? I'm an only child who has lived in 4 different countries. So when I see that, it kind of like brings you down to it. Just like, all right, let's game face right now.
that line that Joe Rogan said for years, and someone else said it, but he always says it, and it's like always hits home. Is it spot on? He says the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Yep.
And
that's a reality.
Yeah, it's a reality, and so you understand things about the world that I don't, and most people you come into contact with don't. And when you don't see it up close, it's very, very hard for people to relate to that. It's even hard for me, and my job is to talk with people from all around the world who come in here for 3-6 hours and spew every experience they have. Like, I definitely have a better ability to do it than others, but I still wasn't there.
Yeah.
I still can't see what that was right when they were in that moment or in this place and saw this thing, you know? And sometimes, like, the last year, for example, has been the most challenging of my life.
Why?
I think just business and trying to grow this thing and being such a limited underdog and, you know, not having any money besides what comes in from this podcast and reinvesting every dollar of it, but there not being enough to reinvest to do what I want. You know, these are good problems to have. And I will sit there and I will think about the example of, like, sometimes when I'm really fucking off, which I do, you know, I'm human, it happens. But, like, one of the things that will set me back sometimes is thinking about someone I've had in here who's had some crazy circumstances on the podcast and thinking about how maybe they can't do this right now and they'd love to. And then the more general one, which is like, you know, there's someone on their deathbed right now who's begging for a second opportunity at something. And I'm sitting here, as far as I can tell, not with cancer, working on my dream, living a healthy life. And like, this is what I'm bitching about. It's hard. It's hard to put yourself there, but I still try to do it. But you're still not looking at the person with, you know, the heart meter going down to 0. You're trying to picture it in your head. It is so funny
because, like, I have, like that same, like, dichotomy is inside my brain as well because, like, you want to be grateful for what you have. You want to be grateful for what you have yourself built instead of always like torturing yourself with an underdog mentality. But we also know that that is the mentality which drives you forward.
Yes.
So you can't just like rest on your laurels and all of a sudden like you stop working as hard as you used to. But at the same time, you don't want to be miserable all the time.
No, it's a great point. Yeah.
And I had to check myself a lot because like it's so cliche to say, so I don't like to talk about it a lot because like immigrants like do hustle a lot because like they know what not being here looks like, right? But at the same time, at some point when you have like done something and like I'm being like really personal right now, like I've had relationships go the wrong way because I could not get myself out of this brain where I'm always thinking about the next day and like how to make this thing work and all that stuff. So instead of just like taking a breather in, but at the same time, if you do too much of it, you stop being yourself. So what is that middle ground? I haven't figured out, but all I want to tell you right now is like you are like definitely not an underdog in this space. Like you are but you are really close to being in the founding fathers of like the founding fathers of this genre of podcasting. As someone who studies this this medium really closely.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just my lack of sometimes self-esteem, but like I've never felt that way.
It's because you don't leave this place.
Well, I do now a lot more than I did, but
Yeah.
you're 100% right. For 3.5 years, I didn't, and I still would like to leave it a lot more than I do right now. I'll tell you that. It's still like,
I just want to make sure you're okay.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and-
No, I
yeah.
appreciate that. It's look, I'm a human being, and I'm an overthinking human being too.
Yeah.
I'm somebody with OCD. You get the intrusive thoughts. I'm like, oh, can I do this better? That I deal with, but it wears on me sometimes because it's not so much. How do I put this? I've always had this battle with how I talk to myself, right? Mm-hmm. I never want to be that person who talks to himself in a way that then you become braggadocious about everything you do. I always wanted to lean towards being the guy like, who the fuck are you, bitch? Figure it out.
Yeah.
Right? But you have to find a middle ground there. Yeah. And I've been getting slightly better. I still got a long way to go, but I've been getting slightly better over the past 3-4 months in particular at finding that middle ground. And the one thing I realized is that, to be frank with you, when I walk in this studio, I mean, not so much today because like you're hosting me today, but when I walk in here and I have a guest right there, and it's my job to make sure this thing goes right. When that door shuts, I'm Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And that's it. This is going to go how I say it's going to go, and there's no one who could do a better job than me. Now, I do think there's one guy who does a better job than me out there, but not when that door shuts.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm constantly working on my craft, and I have insane confidence in this part right here. Everything else in my life, though, has gotten to a point. This is me self-evaluating on where I'm at and where, more importantly, how I need to move to the next part of my life here as I do this job. I've noticed that other things in my life are the complete opposite of that at this point. And, I was talking with my friend John Rondi about this the other day, on camera and off camera. But, I've never studied charisma or how to do it or how to communicate. I was an only child. I got thrown into a lot of situations. I people watched like crazy. Whatever this is that I do, I can just do. And I'd gotten to a point like early 2023, late 2022, where when I wasn't in the studio and I went anywhere else, I don't know what happened, but I was totally myself and I owned the room. And that's a great feeling.
Yeah,
like when you can do that. It's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Right? And then for some reason, in like the spring of 2023 into the summer, which ironically was the most success the show had ever had, that went away. And in my actual life now, like my charisma or whatever it is, it feels like it's at a zero when I'm not in here. Because my mind is too filled with too many thoughts. I will literally be going for a walk and thinking about like freeze frames on the podcast, in hour 2 and minute 1, frame 23. Like, oh, wait a second. No, we can edit that. We got to make sure that hook is at 0.5 seconds before that, not afterwards, because they fucked that one up on Tuesday. And like some of this, I am really trying to offload now, right? And trying to bring in other people who do that. And I've done that, but I'm still limited because like I need money to do that. So there's still a lot that I have to do. My producer, Alessi, has been like a godsend because he's taken a ton of shit off my plate. But now I know his mind's cluttered too. And I see that. And I'm like, okay, well, he's not as bad as me, but like I know what that is. I don't want to have him deal with that as well because now, we're the two guys like driving this boat.
Well,
and we're both like constantly like, oh my God, are we doing this right? Are we doing that right? So that's certainly a battle. And I feel like the root cause is that I'm too locked in on everything that happens because I feel like I'm nowhere. Because I feel like this podcast could be over tomorrow. I still have that mentality. I still don't have money. I don't know what that is. I've never had money in my life. I grew up well, like my dad did well, right? Like I grew up upper middle class, but like I never had money. I worked when I was 13 years old. I worked when I was 14 years old, all the way through. Like, and that's good parenting, I think. My parents made me dogs. Awesome. But like, and I'm very grateful for that, by the way, because they really instilled that. But, I don't know what it's like to really have a lot of residual income that I could just fuck around and be able to breathe for a couple days if I need to. It's constantly like, wait, I made on the main channel $671.37 yesterday. real number. Like, okay, how do we make that again today?
Yeah.
You know, because I'm spending so much money every month. Oh my God, on the business. Oh, dude, it would make you throw up. But look, there's a lot of people. You're one of them who have come in here and said like, "Yo, just like looking down the line, whatever we can do to help." And I would be nowhere without all the different, like on a micro level, all the different people that do that. They help make this thing go.
The Jesus Christ. Besides anything we get out of this today, I just want to make sure that I empathize with you on every single level. And I'm not even talking about like doing business or anything like that. If you need anyone to talk to, as also a fellow only child with no money who grew up,
Yeah.
I'm here to talk about it. Okay, and the people watching thingy that said I did that in a lot of different countries, because like when you move, there's nothing else to do. Just like look at people and look at how they interact, and look at how people with money interact. Look at how people who are on your level interact. So that was my life for the longest time, and it still is.
Yeah.
So. And just to close the loop on the charisma part, the first time I met you was at a dinner with about 20 something people in New York City, and you were doing pretty good. And
Thank you.
Yeah,
I didn't feel like I did that night, but okay.
The reason I talked to you because I wanted to talk to you, and you came off as someone who knows what he's talking about, and obviously we have similar interests. So that's where I'm gonna close the loop on us being narcissists and move on to next week's election.
Oh shit! Next week's
Forgot
election.
about that, right? Yeah, that's
I
happening
did.
next week.
Wait. Next week's election?
Debate. My bad.
okay.
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah, you don't
I
have to
was like,
vote
wait
next
a
week.
second.
No.
Am I gonna look like an idiot?
No,
right?
nope. I definitely. I'm the idiot. Yeah, I meant the debates. Yeah, and I work in news. Yeah.
You know, I'll definitely watch it for the entertainment. I'll tell you.
Do you
that.
think it's worth it?
Probably not.
Yeah. Why not?
I think we're at a comedically bad level politically. I hate to be the cynic with stuff, and I'd like to actually try to open the loop to being hopeful on it. I think a guy like Trump, who is the most entertaining human being I've ever seen. I mean, I would watch that guy read the phone book.
He's objectively funny.
Oh my God, he's
objectively funny.
Exactly,
Yeah.
He's hilarious. And like when people who are really hard left who hate him like can't admit that sometimes he's funny, I'm like, guys, like he's funny, and that's part of his charm. That's the biggest part of his charisma and what draws people to him. But like, yes, as a political candidate, I mean, I know we can do way better. I also know that the other guy's dead. Like, we have a dead guy running against Trump. Yeah. It's like, you know, so cynically in the short term, the election's November 5th, I guess, November 6th. I'll wake up, whatever the result, I'll be a little disappointed, regardless of which way it goes, and then I'll go about my life. And the reason I say I'm a little hopeful is because I'm like, well, we know Biden's not even going to last another 4 years, so, like, he'll be out of the picture. And if Trump gets in office, which it looks like he will, and I anticipate he'll win this election, just looking at the vibes of the country and everything, you know, after 4 years, he'll never stop talking, but he won't be president anymore. And hopefully, on the other side of that, the politics aren't so far divided that, you know, people can, you know, there'll still be the hateful back and forth and stuff, but like, it won't consume as much of people's attentions of the reality show aspect of it. No pun intended. Yeah. Seriously. And, you know, some people are like, no, it's gone too far. Or like, no, it's going to be cult of personality forever. The thing about it is, you know, Trump was the celebrity, right? And he was the outsider. And all the shit they've put that guy through, most of it, there's some things he obviously brought on himself. But, like, we see these cases they're bringing in these court. They're fucking crazy. Like objectively, this is insane that people are bringing these cases against him. It's only driving people right into his arms, by the way. But, like, you know, I think he is now serving as an example to, I don't know, the Mark Cubans of the world, the people, billionaires with these great lives, these celebrities, if you will, looking at this going, why the fuck would I ever do that? Like, I am living a great life right now. I can go give my opinion on TV and people don't care, but if I ran for president and they did anything like this to me because they didn't like some of my opinions, why would I ever? I'm a billionaire. Why would I put myself through that?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think not even just billionaires, but like people who are famous with attention who might want to look to this. It's like, why would they even want to do this at this point? So maybe because of that, as cynical as this is, we'll go back to the good old boring politician people who, say that, and on Tuesday, you make sure you pull that poll for me. And sadly, I'll be like, oh, thank God. We're back. So, I mean, I would imagine in the debate, to go back to your original question, like, Biden's at a point where he can't talk. They'll probably give him some good stuff before that debate. So
I don't think it's healthy for a country to care so much about.
I agree.
The reason there are like three branches of the government and is there because like we don't want either thing to like take over everyone's lives. And it kind of bothers me when I go to like my friends and my families and the default line of conversation is politics. Yeah. Mostly because like that's my default line in my work and I have to talk about it all day, and it kind of like rubs me the wrong way when everyone else wants to talk about that as well. And obviously the team sport aspect of it is kind of toxic to the extent that it has that actual effects on everyone's relationships. People don't know how to talk to each other anymore if they disagree with someone. And I think, to your point, after the next 4 years, there will be a world where that kind of gets ratcheted down.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I really I'm hopeful.
I don't want to play down on any of the issues which is going through the country, by the way, which there are plenty of. So, but at the same time, we should be able to address those issues without losing our head over who is sitting in the White House. That's my point.
Well, it's cult of personality, and it's also social trends. Like we started this conversation towards the beginning of it, talking about our generational trends and how, for example, like you said, we're the not post 9/11 era. That's like my first memory when I was a little kid. We're the post 2008 era on the come up, and now we're also the COVID era. Like the millennials, Gen Zs, like this is what we know. Yeah. It's like death, torture everywhere.
And so like that's why I get like so pissed off at boomers anytime they're like, oh, why do the kids hate America? I was like, have you talked to them? Like, have you seen what they've like?
Fair question.
Like, again, I don't want you to agree with their political views, but like empathize with what they have gone through. Like they don't know exactly, but they had the effects of their parents having gone through the Depression.
Yeah.
And then everything that you just laid down. So are you shocked that this generation looks at the future and is glum about it?
No.
And you're going out of your way to sell America to them without actually making a hard pitch of how doing so will make their lives fundamentally better. All you have to say, this is the greatest country in the world, which, by the way, I believe in.
Yeah.
But your pitch is weak.
Yeah.
Your pitch is fundamentally weak and shallow.
Yeah. I see exactly what you're saying.
And there's no quick fix, by the way. Like, there's like a lot of issues here, like, which is populism, which is the fact that the two-party system is broken, and they like. Yes, there is a aspect of personal responsibility and they have to kind of go out of their way to make their lives better. But at the same time, when you're designing policies, we have to talk about the lowest common denominator type of people. And the fact that today we don't do that is concerning.
Yeah. So there's a couple things here, and one's going to tie right into the other.
Go for it.
I love history. I'll study pretty much any kind of history. I'm constantly jumping around on things I look at. Recently, I've been looking at a lot of Revolutionary War stuff and build up to World War II stuff in particular. And the political divide that happened after the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, across Europe and across the world, it actually even got to America, is very reminiscent of what we see now. And that is things moved hard left and hard right. And we saw the rise of communism in places, and we saw the rise of fascism in places, very famously. And within the subcategory of left-right, there was also the way it really infused in America at this time was because, especially after World War I, where a lot of guys went over to Europe and didn't come back. Obviously, people felt a certain way about war. Totally understand that. But also, once the Roaring '20s ended with the Great Depression, there was a massive, massive divide in America between people who felt like America could be the leader in the world militarily, and people who wanted to be isolationist as fuck. And I would argue that history proves, when you look at it, that if the isolationism wasn't so strong, tens of millions of lives in World War II would have been saved, because it kept us out of the war until, Hitler had already done a lot of shit, and the Japanese obviously came here and did what they did. However, I also don't think the alternative of being like military-industrial complex is good. I think that's horrible. It's a very difficult question, but this is the problem with society. Society is built to have one pendulum swing to the other in everything we do.
Society, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, I always cite the law, one of the universal laws of physics, which is for every action there's an equal but opposite reaction, which proves to you equilibrium's where it's at. And yet we, the human experiment here in the world, have proven over and over again that even though we know equilibrium's supposed to be right there, we still insist on making sure we have the action and the reaction. And so when you see these trends form in the build up to World War II. I'm not saying we're going into World War III right now, but I am saying shit's getting weird out there. It's like it makes you think about the patterns of generations. And this has been a theme that you've perhaps even unknowingly brought up throughout this entire conversation. So I want to explain this to people. But have you ever read the book The Fourth Turning?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know exactly what it is. And for people out there, I don't want to go through the entire thing, but these guys in the 90s, these historians, sociologists, they wrote this book called The Fourth Turning, and essentially what they did is they said the big mistake historians always make is they get so good at studying the past that they think they can predict the future, and they end up changing the very patterns they studied to try to predict that future, and they're usually wrong. So what these guys did is said, okay, we're going to try to find patterns, and then we're just going to go like this. We're going to lift that and say, whatever it is, that's how it's going to go down in the future. We're not going to change anything, edit anything. This is just what it is. And what they figured out is that they looked at it on a global scale and looked at it, over the past 2,000 years, but then really dove down into America. And they realized America works in these 4-generation systems, and each generation spans about 21 and a half years on average, I think it is, for a total of about 80 to 85 years. And the cycles repeat. And so there's 4 different types of generations. There's I'll use ours as an example, the ones we know. There's the boomers, who are born into the good time, post-World War II, everyone get happy. There's the nomads, who are born of the boomers in the times where it's like, what are we doing as a society? Think the hippie movement, Vietnam, all that. Then there's the heroes, who are born into the brewing crisis period. Wait, is shit getting weird in the world? What's our place? That's the millennials. And then there are the artists, who are born into the crisis. They're born into, post 9/11, global financial crisis, they're coming of age as COVID is here. And so each of these generations exists across 4 different time periods, and they always exist across the same time period, right? So the boomers are always born in, I forget the names for it, but the boomers are always born into this happy times generation. And then they're 21 to 42, meaning coming of age after childhood, during the awakening generation, so the Vietnam hippie era. And then they're in charge, meaning they're the CEOs of companies and high level in the economy and in government when they're 41 to 63 during the brewing crisis period. And then they're retired and sitting around going, what the fuck, during the crisis period. And so on. You look at each of those 4 generations I mentioned before, after the boomers, there's the nomads or whatever. The nomads are always in charge when there's a crisis, just like they are right now. And so these guys figured out this stuff happens in cycles. And they said, look at the wars. Revolutionary War, 75 to 83. 80 to 85 years later, 1861 to 65, you have the Civil War. 80 to 85 years later, 41 to 45, you have World War II. 80 to 85 years later is right the fuck where we are right now. And when I look at this and realize how these different generations are formed by what they're born into, the kids we're talking about who have lost hope in America, many of them are Gen Z. Mm-hmm. They are the artists. Mm-hmm. The last generation like that was the silent generation, who was born into the Great Depression. They learned to pinch pennies together. My grandma, who does just fine, my grandpa was a doctor, right? She still writes down how much the orange costs at the store. I'd say it drives me nuts, but I fully understand.
Yeah.
Because that's the world she knew when she was growing up. The difference then and the difference now is that back then there was no technology, there was no mass communication, and there was like, we weren't in like the 1800s where sometimes you like died at random shit, but like the world was a lot simpler and people just had to get apples to survive.
Yeah.
Right? Now, during this era, when people ran onto hard times, at least they still had public housing and shit like that. And they still had an internet connection and a phone and a way to express themselves and things to constantly take away their attention that also would drive home, again, like some of the opinions they have about how bad America is and stuff. So the difference is they have, like back then, the silent generation had more clear priorities right in front of them versus now there's a little bit more of a cushiony life. And so people turn inward when that happens. And I think that's why things are gloomy. But you also make the great point that you're like, why aren't the older generations, instead of just going, come on, we're so fucking happy to live here? It's like, Bill, you bought your house for $20,000 in 1981. It's worth $2 million now. I just paid $2 million in fucking interest for the rest of my life for college. Of course I'm not happy. Right? Like, I think that's a great point. The conversation has to be calmer that way, and we need to have less fighting over the politics of it and more figuring out, like, okay, how are we going to come out to the other side?
Yeah.
Because the good news is, if we're coming towards the end of a crisis period right now and these motherfuckers that wrote the fourth turning are onto something, we're going to be going into a good period in 5-10 years. So, like, how do we get there where this generation's like, you know what, fuck it, things are okay?
Yeah. I think, okay, so I want to get back to the fourth turning part of it, and by the way, you really laid it down really beautifully. But I think to your point about how your grandma had to figure out how much apples cost and how can we afford to eat and all that, today, for our generation, and even arguably for millennials as well, how old are you?
31.
I'm 28. So I'm in the edge of being a millennial and also a Gen Z.
We're back in.
So... we have done a really good job of figuring it out, the bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy, right? We have figured out a really good way of like, okay, I will at least survive. I have something to eat. I can afford a fridge. I can get a TV from China for really dirt cheap. And the rest of it, that's where the debate is. Like your own personal problems, relationships, health, future, jobs, business, house. That's where the wobbliness comes from. So there has to be an aspect of like just perspective. Okay, for my grandparents and arguably for my parents during the war or whatever, this, what I take for granted, did not exist.
Yes.
Right? So there has to be like an understanding among our generations, like, all right, cool, we got our bases covered right now. Now the rest of it, which is a debate, like arguably kind of like, I don't know what's going on, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that the system itself is something we should throw out of the baby should not be thrown out with the bathwater.
Yes.
Right?
Good
So
point.
like that's point A. And point B is, and this is not a political argument or an argument which I will give to everyone at large, but I will talk to individuals who are super competent and super responsible and that I will tell the story of fourth turning to them. It's like, hey man, like, see like how these things repeat, and even though right now things are looking weird, but that doesn't mean just like give the fuck up and like never think about buying a house or marrying someone or starting a business, because things do get better as shown by history over and over, and this is your time to get into the mines, work hard, actually build a foundation so that when the fog eventually clears, you are the person who is ready to take everything on.
100%. Yeah, I think that's... The only difficulty is getting kids' attention these days.
Yeah, no, that's impossible.
You know, because they
you would know.
They're constantly like, oh, next video, right? Like, okay, John, that sounds cool. Shut the fuck up. I'm gonna watch this now. You know, but the 500-pound elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, but that is a human reality, is how something profound in all the wrong ways can, on a dime, change people's perspectives, right?
Yeah.
So think on an individual level real quick. If I'm some lazy kid fucking off and not putting in any of my talents to do anything with my life or whatever, you know, sitting on the couch smoking weed, taking everything for granted, and one day, you know, my brother, sister, and parents are killed in a car accident.
Your life's changed.
My
forever.
life changes, and you know, sometimes people can, you know, then go the depressed route, of course, understandably, and, you know, commit suicide or something like that. But a lot of people maybe like come out the other side of that and, you know, never be the same again. But also, it ends up being the thing that changes their life and changes their perspective, right? And so when you look at that on a nation basis, I often say this: outside of the war, 1812, which doesn't count, we've never been invaded as a nation, and it shows. The closest things we've had to an invasion are what? The 2 attacks that happened.
Yeah.
The 2 big ones, Pearl Harbor and 9/11, right? And right on that point, those things hit home. They were both in one place. Many people died. They were horrible. But you know what happened?
The country was patriotic.
Oh my God, people united the next day, and all the problems that existed the day before didn't.
Yeah.
And I worry about that all the time because just on a population basis, it's proven time and time again when we get on comfortable times where, you know, a lot of shit doesn't happen, like we turn in on ourselves.
Yeah.
And like COVID ended up being political, so it wasn't the thing that was going to unite people. But like if God forbid some horrible attack happened or something like that, because guess what? Now we got an enemy somewhere and everyone's like, fuck it, let's go get him. That can change some things, and I hope it doesn't take something like that. But I do think about that often. Like that's the kind of shit that gets people's attention.
Speaking on turning on ourselves, and I want to segue this to talking about media and news and politics in general.
Yeah.
Something which I'm super fascinated about is that during Cold War, the media was obsessed with the good guy, bad guy narrative. The bad guys are the Soviet Union, Russia, the people who believe in communism, and we are the good guys vis-a-vis red, white, and blue, freedom, America, and there is something to protect. So they're the bad guys, we are the good guy. That was the narrative which was drawn in the sand, and that worked really well. When the Soviet Union fell, what happened was that the media didn't have that dichotomy to repeat over and over again. So that division, that good guy, bad guy story was told within your own population, right? Yeah. And that team sport became like they looked inward for that team sport.
When did CNN and Fox form, by the way?
During that time. Yeah. And that's how, and it was really profitable, by the way, and that's why it worked for them. So the point being, that's the foundation of the modern news economy. And I don't think that gets brought up enough. Because right now we take it for granted, like, oh, it's the news. Oh, it's going to play in the airport. Oh, it's going to like, that becomes your default settings because like you don't really think about how these things started. I don't mean you, I mean people in general.
Yeah.
So I think as an individual, when you're talking about your neighbor's politics or something like that, like what he believes in is kind of dictated by their team leaders, right? And the person who they're listening to. And that has the core root of that is being dictated by people who fundamentally profit from the division.
I think that's such a good point that you've also seen up close yourself too.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, we live in a world where people are motivated by the intensity of victory when Van Jones cries because Donald Trump just lost the election. And a world where Alex Jones gets on there and goes, "We're at war! We're at war right now! We got to stop all these goddamn liberals!" And people, there's like the warring apes in people to believe that, like, oh, this is my war. This is what I have to be a part of.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, Van understands my perspective because we hate that guy no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah.
Every little thing.
Yeah.
Even like the criminal justice reform, you hate that too. Like, you know, it's a team society because people constantly want to be on one. I see it with what I do because I have people from across the spectrum on. I always say I kind of have a line, probably gotten it wrong a couple times, but like I try not to have people who are left of here or right of here. Mm-hmm. If that's like 0 and 100, like that back area. But everything in here I have.
I'm going to push you to define those lines. What are those lines?
Like the back 15 to 20% area, meaning people who I can predict the next thing out of their mouth with 100% accuracy before they say it, right? Like,
so it's not like a political belief per se, but it's like how predictable you are in your politics.
Well, it is. It has everything to do with political beliefs because when someone's really left, you know what they're going to say.
Okay.
You can raise the greatest point to them that says like, oh, you know what? The climate's not going to end tomorrow,
Okay,
but they'll tell you that like Greta Thunberg,
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
she knows all.
Okay.
And then someone on the right, you can tell them like, hey, you know, Biden's legislation on China actually agree with Trump. It's pretty good. They'll be like, he's owned by China.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I see where this is
Relax,
going.
yeah, yeah.
There's it's not interesting to me because for 3 hours I'm like, okay, all right, you know. And I've seen it on some podcasts where I then try to play devil's advocate with people and like
It doesn't go well. Yeah. No.
doesn't go well. So I try not to do that. But I mean, like the large swath of it, I do. And as a result, I am constantly, because I have fans on both sides of the spectrum, constantly having people trying to pull you like, yeah, you see this our way, or yeah, you see this our way. And I'm like, first of all, I change my opinions when I have better evidence.
Yeah.
So if someone gives me better evidence the other way tomorrow, sorry, pal, you're out of luck. Secondly, what is this thing? Why do you care so much? We're here to, it's not that serious.
What is our way like?
Right.
Who's our and what is way?
It's
Yeah.
like I don't need the team
Yeah.
with it. We're all Americans and people of the world. I have people listening all over the world too. We all look at different things that are happening in society and want to know more about it. That's all I'm doing here.
Yeah.
And like the idea that you need me to identify with your people who you vote for or something is so stupid to me. Especially, by the way, as someone who has been pretty seriously left and pretty seriously right in my life. Now, was I on either end of those spectrums? No. But was I like strongly liberal and then strongly conservative in successive eras? Yeah. In college, I was very liberal. I was never a dick about it. And then after college, I was very Trumpian conservative and like was never a dick about it. But like, it was just like, wait, how could you not see it this way? And then eventually when I started to figure out that like so many of these answers lie in the middle and so many of my beliefs aren't reflected in the candidates, it's literally like the one thing in my life I've ever felt some form of like calm zen on. Like it's so clear to me, you know, like I brought it up a few minutes ago. Isolationism bad, military industrial complex bad. That must mean the answer's here. You know, like you look at so many issues like climate change bad, climate ending tomorrow. No, it's not going to, Al Gore. That means the answer's here. It's like issue by issue. With taxes, I see it that way. And I don't think any government uses taxes the right way. But even I understand that a government has to exist because the buck has to end somewhere, right? But I also don't think we should tax the billionaires 75. Like, that's crazy, right? And so my politics are informed by how I see things as logically as I can. I still have emotion like everyone else, but I don't need people trying to say like, oh, because you think this one thing, I'm there with you, brother. That means you must be here too. Stop. It's very exhausting to me.
What happened like when Trump was coming up and you're in college? How did you view the world?
Oh, well, I mean, there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
This was right when he came up, right when I was about to leave college.
Yeah.
And so you're coming out into the real world for the first time. Where'd I go, by the way? I went to Wall Street, surrounded by a lot of guys whose number one priority is what?
Money.
The economy and the money. So that presses you a little bit. But also, I think Barack Obama's second term was not great. And in particularly, I think he was very green on foreign policy when he came into the presidency. And I think he remained that way throughout his 8 years. I think he'd probably do a better job today because now he knows what it is. But like his second term with foreign policy, the rise of ISIS and all that, there was no strength there.
Yeah.
There was no leading from the front on those things. And that's when, you know, fuck it. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, get your guns, boys. Let's go.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm cool with that in
Yeah.
that type of scenario. And that was my big issue.
Yeah.
Right? And so the other thing was I was a very impressionable 21, 22-year-old kid, and Donald Trump is the funniest motherfucker I've ever seen in my life. And so, and he's from New York, like I'm from this area.
Talks like us,
Like I'm like, God damn it, that guy's, and I always was obsessed with people being real.
Yeah.
I could never, I mean, that's why I do the job the way I do. I show up as Julian Dorey. Like, I could never understand this thing. Like, I'd grow up watching the news knowing that, like, The Departed is coming out as a movie where they're like, every other word is like fuck or shit, and you know there's sex scenes and everything. I can get porn online, but Bill O'Reilly can't say fuck, and Anderson Cooper can't say fuck. It was so weird to me. I'm like, I know these guys. The camera stops, and they're like, "Hey, fuck you, Tim, get it right."
Yeah.
You know. And I'm like, but why did they have to get on TV and be like, "And welcome back to the news, ladies and gentlemen"? It just felt so not real. And then with Trump, I'm like, yo, this dude has no filter. There's no fake with him. Like, again, now I'm like, also for worse, I didn't see that at the time, but like for better or for worse, you're gonna get what he thinks.
Yeah.
And he's gonna say it how he's gonna say it. And he was fucking hysterical. And I do think people, like, look, because he had things like Trump steaks and stuff like that. That's not great business. Yes. Yes. But people also do, like, love discrediting, like, his whole business background.
Yeah.
And that is so stupid to me.
Yeah, especially in New York. Yeah,
bro,
like Jesus Christ.
He is out. Steve Jobs is the greatest marketer I've ever personally seen to live, outside of like religious figures, I guess maybe. Yeah. But like, you know, Donald Trump's up there.
Yeah,
that guy was worth, I think it was like minus $750 million at one point in 1993 or 1994. And by the early 2000s, he was a billionaire again by selling 5 letters, Trump. I mean, that is, you have to give that to him. That is a level of genius. And like, I think people, if I could look at parts I was right about with him, I think it was really good that he was someone who spoke like the common man, even if he wasn't, which he kind of isn't. Like, let's be honest. No. He's not. Yeah. But he also was willing to question some things that were just always assumed to be like, oh, let's let the adults handle that.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, wait a minute. That's our money and it's our government. Why shouldn't the people care about that too? And finally, this is actually, I should not forget this point. All the people who the Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. had sat in their little steakhouses on K Street and laughed about, and not even laughed about, they didn't even take the time to laugh about these people that they left behind in the flyover states, if you will, working in industries that are headed in the wrong direction, not going to be here, and receiving no resources to change their reality. Donald Trump, billionaire that he is, who probably would have talked about those people the same way 20 years ago, when he became a candidate, said, fuck that, I'm going to the mines with them. And he did. And you have to give him credit for that. And like when I look back on it, 8 years later, he's still doing the same thing. And people, instead of complaining about every single thing he does, yes, I have a lot of problems with him politically. I have a lot of problems with him personally as a politician and someone who represents America. But like, you also need to look at some of the things that he does well. Like Bruce Lee used to say, you discard what is bad and you take what is good from people. And there are, how many people are in Congress and Senate? Like 535 total. There are 535 people, whatever it is, in Washington, D.C. I could start with, and all the people who work for them who could take a very good lesson from some of those things. And they don't.
In the most core sense, why did you think he ran for the first time he did? And what do you think those reasons are this time around? Because like you brought up like about his record per se. And there are like plenty of footage of like him and Oprah, I think, like way back when, and he's talking about how the country's getting ripped off.
We're getting ripped off. Everyone's coming after us. They're taking our money.
And this is way before the narrative of like China existed and Germany taking our money existed or whatever. But he was talking about those things way back when. And I think like that kind of like shows consistency regarding what someone cares about politically. Yes. But I want to lob it to you. Like, why do you think in the most fundamental sense he ran?
All right, in a utopian world, just understanding, trying to read humans and why they run, that's going to be my first answer. I would say it's because he's a little narcissistic and actually does like America.
Yeah. And
didn't like some of the things that are happening, and the combination of those forces came together. I do think he loves himself more in America, though. I will say that. I think he loves himself more than anything else. I think that's just a part of his...
And I'm not saying that's a pejorative, by the way.
Yeah.
At all. It just drives him, whatever works. Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
But the real answer to that question is I think we'll never know.
Yeah.
Because I think there are things that happen behind the scenes with everyone in any kind of powerful position like that at any part of government that will involve people, places, handshakes, and money that we will never know about in any file or anything. So I don't know the real reason he ran. I could speculate on stuff, and I won't do that because all it would be is speculation based on no evidence. But there is a reason things happen. You know, he came up in 2015, like when he was first running. The tools that the powers that be, if you will, had behind the scenes from a technological perspective by that time were quite strong. They're stronger than what we have right now publicly. And so these things can be simulated. And I wonder how much of him was simulated. Meaning,
What do you mean simulated?
not like simulation theory or anything, but like what people's reaction to him on a societal level based on certain inputs, if you will, would be. And then are there people behind the scenes who are helping craft that based on the results they get from said input studies? I wonder about that stuff. So I don't know. I think if you gave me a chance to have 6 drops of true serum, I'd get the 6 or is it 6 or 5 surviving president, whatever it is, the surviving presidents in a room, and I'd give them each true serum one by one, and I'd say, "What's the story? Why'd you run? Who are you? Who paid you? What'd you do?" Like, I'd love to do that with W, because he wasn't in charge of that White House. Dick Cheney was. How'd that happen, right? So, you know, there's so much we don't know that I'm pretty humble at even trying to answer that. I'll stick with my first answer based on what we can see publicly. I assume he just wanted to, but money. It's everywhere.
I think you kind of like pleading the fifth is actually really realistic and pragmatic there, because like in my time in DC, one of the people I had to work really close with, and I can't say too much about it, was Dick Cheney's right-hand man during W's time. So
that's not Armitage, is it?
No, that's not Armitage. Okay. So, and like he's also Indian, and he kind of like gave me insight into the whole operations of like how the city works in general and how presidents operate. And he's also Tucker Carlson's best friend. I can go about like my time in DC, like in tandem, but that was my insight into like how DC works in general. So
that is a trial by fire, my friend.
Yeah, and it was so funny because talking about Tucker, Tucker was my first boss. My first job in Washington DC
that's right.
was working for this company called Daily Caller, and it was founded by Tucker, and it was like an online blog. And I met him for the first time, literally the day after I had moved to DC. And I was an intern back then. And the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, we're not like this. We're not crazy like this, by the way. Don't make an impression of America like this." And he was saying that because like that's when Kavanaugh's whole spiel was going on. And we had like protesters outside our office, not because the office, but like that's the DC general area. And we were close to the Supreme Court. And he was like, "We're not like this, by the way." And so funny, everything which had happened since then in the country is literally more of that.
Yes.
So yeah, like he's a fascinating guy, and yeah, the point being like that was the time in DC, and I do realize that the powers that be and the forces which we don't realize have way more effect than the figureheads that we see on TV.
You know, kind of random, but I had a dream. I had a dream last night. And it was I was sitting at a table. There was a lot of shit going on in this dream. Because like someone fixed my sleep like a few months ago, and now I dream every night. It's fucking wild what this does to you. I used to dream like once a month because I didn't get this thing called REM sleep.
Oh yeah.
But now I get REM sleep, helps, so I'm just having crazy dreams every night. So at one point, it's me, Danny Jones, and like 3 other dudes sitting at a table just slanging it on like the Iraq War years, and on Dick Cheney and Halliburton and whatever. And then all of a sudden, Danny goes like, "Well, I'll be dipped in shit." And Dick Cheney sits down and like does the whole like leg over and looks at me and he goes, "So I hear you have some opinions about my time in office." And I was like, "Boy, I do!" And I just ripped it to his face for like a while, and he took it sitting. I mean, I don't know if he could stand up, but like he was sitting down.
Not anymore,
the whole time. And then like it ended. But I woke up, I'm like, shit, I didn't get to tell him that to his face for real? Damn it. But yeah, Dick Cheney, not a good guy.
Yeah, that was
Definitely
like talking about people who like like most normies, like we live in our media politics bubble, so we know who Dick Cheney is. Like ask anyone else, like they don't know who Dick Cheney is.
Yeah.
But their entire life is kind of like marred by what he has done and the ripple effects of said decisions by him. Pivoting really, really, really hard right now, which I really want to talk to you, is about the state of affairs of male-female relationships today and how the politics and the cultural landscape affects it. One of the numbers which I'm like fascinated by is the fact that when jobs go away in middle of America, the jobs which go away usually are the jobs which are held by dudes, right? Being factory workers. The jobs which end up staying are being a nurse, being a teacher, which are usually kept by the women, right? So that economy is right now, and to some extent ever since, I would say, post NAFTA, has been a lot of dudes' jobs going away and a lot of women's jobs staying the way that it was. So they make a living. The guys don't have a job. They obviously, the women don't want to get into a relationship with them, but at the same time, as human beings are, they hook up and they have babies. So those babies are born in wedlock in a society where the dudes don't have jobs, and that has a ripple effect in the society where we live in today.
Yeah. So, all right, that's a great.
And I haven't phrased a question out of this, by the way, but
I thought you did. I'm sorry.
yeah. But my if I had to pull a question out of it is, and we can talk about it separately, like how is it in the city and versus like how is it in rural America? What do you think the role economy plays in how men and women interact with each other vis-a-vis in the dating landscape?
Everything comes from the economy.
Yeah.
Everything. Relationships, war, ups, down. It's all, unfortunately, like I always used to ask people this because like I have a very, like you could teach me a lot about making money. I'm the guy who's money second, and that costs me sometimes. It costs me a lot. And so, like, I have people around me who are now trying to help me with that or whatever, because it's a reality, right? You got to focus on how much you make here and how much you make there so you can put it back in your business and do it. But when I was on Wall Street, I was always advising other people, which is way easier than advising yourself.
Yeah.
So I used to say to people, as much as I hated this,
Yeah.
I'd say to them, what are the two most important things in your life?
Yeah.
And usually the answer was going to be health and family.
Yeah.
And I said, well, congratulations, money pays for both.
Yeah.
And that is the reality we have. When you look at any conflict that has ever happened in the world, it had to do with the wealth of nations in some way being in the middle of it and causing it through ripple effects that happen in one or both of the societies or the multiple societies involved, that then everything came together. Mm-hmm. And so I think you make a great point about the division that it's causing from a gender relationship. Yeah. And yes, I see some of the same things. And like, who was that? What the fuck is that guy's name? The Chiefs kicker? Harrison
Butker.
Yeah, Harrison Butker. So he got a lot of shit for this whole speech where he's like, go home and make me a sandwich or whatever. Yeah. Now, I understand what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
I think it was perfectly innocent and fine. Yeah. You're allowed to disagree with people on some things. It's cool. There were themes of what he's saying where I'm like, okay, if that were toned back a little bit, we'd really get somewhere. Mm-hmm. Because what he's saying, some of what he's saying, is that if I were rephrasing it myself and editing it on my own end, I would say, hey, a woman should be able to be president or CEO of fucking Apple, right? If they want to, and that's great. We need to live in an equal society in that way. But also the idea that selling yourself on being the man of the household as a woman is biologically, on a mass population scale, statistically against evolution itself. Yeah. So I think when we look at this country, I don't want to ignore some of the crisis that women are having with all the fucking
stuff, yeah.
Well, no, not even that. Just like even that's the dark shit.
Yeah.
I'm talking about on a day-to-day competing on social media, worrying about how every single fucking thing looks. I mean, my God, it's got to be a fashion show, and I empathize with this, for women to go to work these days. Jesus. Yeah. I mean, look at me. Yeah. I was shirtless when you showed up.
I'm wearing a band T-shirt and you're wearing a Philly shirt.
I am trying. Maybe I should, but
we both put on some hats on and that's it. Yeah.
It is what it is, right? I've walked out of the gym to do this, but there's so much of these expectations on women now, and there's also these expectations: go to college, get the job, rise up. That there is a de-emphasis on also the family structure and being able to be a mother and stuff like that. It's almost, and we see that in the numbers, and I think that is a problem. And on the other side of that, you have men who are going through a crisis period where a lot of jobs, like you said, that are being replaced, started with trade deals, will end up as AI, are happening to men because they're physical jobs where a larger percentage of men are doing them. And then there are a lot of jobs that men feel unfulfilled in because they're working as, their title says VP, but they answer to fucking, Tom in accounting on every fucking thing they do, and they work in a cubicle and hate their life, and they're miserable, and their testosterone's low because they're sitting under lights like this all day and not out there, doing something in the world. That is causing a huge problem as well, and that's one that's less like economic, like for the exact example you gave. But like when you see these things happening, it now is creating a divide between men and women, and we've also seen from a society standpoint, we've seen that divide increase with the all-telling eyes of the internet era and people being able to know everything about each other and the lack of human engagement. It is something that, look, there are some women I talk with where it's heat right away because like they're more with it. Like they're looking at their phone less. They're busting balls. I really like when I got a girl like that. Like I'm gonna bat 1,000 on that, right? But like. There's not as many of them, and there are a lot that like you can tell like, oh, this girl's amazing, but like there's all those thoughts like, oh, I wonder if he likes me, I wonder if he doesn't, let me check my Instagram and find it out. And it just gets weird because then you can get stuck in that funnel with them because you're like, well, what the fuck? And there's a lack of engagement, and there's also, I think what comes out of that, I heard Chris Williamson talking about this, and I thought he was spot the fuck on. There is now this instant judgmental society we have. So you can't even try to figure out if someone likes you. Because it's like, oh, he's looking at me. He's a creep. Which is it? Tell me what it is. I'm not a creep. You're attractive. I'm looking. You're looking too. Which is it? Are you pissed? Are you not? No problem. We'll move on. It doesn't need to be a thing now that you go talk with your 8 girlfriends about. Like there is definitely a divide there because like men are meant to try to seek out women. That is what it is. I'm not saying it can't happen the other way, but like that is getting harder and harder in society. The places I have success with that are in bars. Yeah. That's it. Like in the real world, you are constantly like when I'm at a restaurant or, going to the coffee shop or wherever the fuck I may be, walking on the street. It's not like that anymore because you don't want to be the guy that's like, oh, why is he talking to me? Yeah. And a lot of times that wouldn't be the case, but plenty of times that would be as well.
I want to get back to like the dating aspect of it, but I think like one of the graphs which I was fascinated about with a couple of months ago was this graph of how men and women have not ever been this politically opposite ends of the spectrum.
Really?
Yeah.
Still.
In like especially like our generation today, men and women have never been this much politically opposed to each other. Obviously, dudes are way more conservative, and men and women are way more liberal.
Still?
Right now.
Like at the moment?
At the moment, in the cities especially.
That I could see.
Yeah. Do you have any read on that? If you had to?
I think it was Jack Murphy who runs this podcast called The Team House. He's a former military guy. I'm going to mess up how he said it. He said it so great. He tweeted something out a few months ago where he said, I've always said half of society wants a giant hug from daddy or mommy, and half of society wants daddy or mommy to tell them what the fuck to do and say, let's go. And he said it better than that. But if I were guessing, and I'm only guessing on this because I haven't seen those numbers you're talking about, the only reason I was surprised is because like 4 years ago, right? The society works in pendulums. Yeah. 4 years ago, I would have expected that chart to be like the worst it ever was, right? Yeah. And then today, because like I think this time Trump will win the election, so society's leaned more right now at the moment. I would have thought it was thinner, but if it is still really separated, like you said, I would say it probably has to do with some biology, and that women are more likely to want to provide a nurture for people. So when they hear politicians who talk about, hey, even if they don't actually mean this stuff, hey, we need to be inclusive of everyone and be understanding of different people's perspectives, they go, yes. And then when the dudes want the leader who just like cleans up some of the bullshit, they go, and they hear someone go, "This woke shit sucks," they go, "Yes, you tell me what to do." And it's not a perfect way, but I felt like Jack really, really hit a chord there with what he was saying, and that would I think it's a little bit biological. Yeah.
I want to get my personal beliefs out of the way when it comes to what you talked about, the kind of woman you would bat 100 for. My mom, I'm an only child.
I still wouldn't bat 1,000, but it'd be a good batting.
Especially when you're barred, though. It's kind of hard sometimes. My mom was a teacher, and when I was born, there was not a lot of money going around, and my dad was going through a lawsuit, and we needed money just to survive and pay legal fees and all that stuff. My mom always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, especially when I was born, and take care of the child because she never wanted me to be left at a nursery or something like that at any point in my life. So she told my dad, "Hey, I want to take care of this baby, raise him until he's 5, and then I will go back to teaching." My dad said, "Don't do that because I know that you actually want to be with this kid instead of just going to be a teacher. So stay, be the mom which you have always wanted to be, and I will figure my life out." And he eventually did. So long story long, 5 years later, my mom ends up becoming a teacher again. She started her own business, and I grew up in a house until I was like 16, where I saw my mom wake up in the morning, make the lunch for my dad. My dad used to go to work. My dad comes back. My mom is teaching in the house. My dad used to make dinner for my mom and used to give it to her. So there was this level of symbiosis in my house where I saw that everything was in service to the family, right? So anytime I hear any of these like super radical on any side, like I don't need a man, or from like a dude side, it's like a girl has to make me whatever, like the Harrison Barker stuff. I'm like, it's like what is the goal here?
Yeah.
Is the goal to win something, or is the goal to actually have a family and like make shit work?
We're making enemies out of the genders.
Yeah,
and
like
it's been happening
like
for a
why
long
are we
time.
like what is this fighting for? Like, do straight
Very
people like
stupid.
each other anymore? Like,
Dude, I had the same exact thing, except my dad never cooked dinner for my mom because no one would ever want to put us through what the fuck he would even try to cook.
Yeah.
But the same exact thing. My mom was a very hardworking teacher who did well. She worked at like a really, really good public school. When I was born, she left that.
Yeah.
And then raised me, and then started taking jobs again when I was 10, including starting her own businesses, but it was all stuff she could do while I was at school.
Yeah.
And she dropped me off at school. She picked me up from school. Eventually, she would pick me up from the bus because it would drop me off like near my house, but like cook me dinner, cook me breakfast. Like there was a clear family unit relationship there, and I think that's great to celebrate something like that. Like, I think it's ridiculous. Like, you can have it both ways, or you can have it one way or the other if you want. But saying that, like, oh, if I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm a sell out to the man. Stop.
That's what rubs me the wrong way, and it was so funny. And I was on a date a couple of weeks ago, and it was like a NYU MBA girl, and she's a great person. And one of the first things which she said, it was like, I don't really like kids, and I will never have kids, and I really...
Out!
And it's like first of all, I've never thought deeply about whether or not I want kids. But if you are coming at me this hard about something which
On date one.
and I'm like, do we like hate kids? Again, I want to respect that, by the way, like whatever your call is. But the fact that you are this vehement about this one thing...
It's crazy.
And I'm like, what happened? Like, what changed?
A lot of the things we talked about changed, and things became about economics rather than about feeling of life.
Yeah.
And also society's expectations and the comparison culture changed. There's a need that I'm using that your date as an example where she's like, well, no, I have to do. If I ever did that, then Jenny over here would be able to hold that over me. That I'm just a stay-at-home mom or something. Fuck that, dude. We got to stop worrying about what society's going to think about our decisions. We have to worry about what we want with our decisions. And I think, again, biologically, women. I'm not saying that every woman ever should be a mother. I'm not saying that every woman ever should want kids. Maybe that one really didn't, and that was a real thing. But, like, the vast majority of women are biologically wired to want to have children, and the vast majority of men are biologically wired to want to fucking put their seed into the world and also have children.
Yeah.
Again, doesn't mean 100%, but when you have society talking about this all the time,
Yeah.
that's where I get concerned, because I think there's other things creeping into that. And like, fuck yeah, I want to get married one day and I want to have kids. Now, how many we have is going to be a lot up to my wife, because like she got to carry them and everything.
Yeah.
Unless we figure that out by then. But either way, like, yeah, I'd like more than one, and I'd like to find a woman who wants more than one, and we can figure out all the other shit afterwards. But like, you know, in that respect, like, I'll provide, she'll do that, and whatever else she wants to do, I'll support it. I'm never like the whole concept of like, well, no, I'll be the head of the household and tell the woman what to. That's bullshit. Yeah. Like if my wife wants to be an entrepreneur,
Yeah, that's
fucking
awesome.
Fucking go do it.
Yeah,
I'll fund it.
That's one of the reasons I would be attracted to someone.
Yes.
Like there is this thing called DINKs, which is dual income, no kids, DINK couple. So in
God, we got a goddamn phrase for everything.
I know,
now.
yeah. So like, especially in the cities, if a couple exists and they get married and they both have jobs, they would rather not have kids, because that's against their lifestyle, and they would rather just enjoy the combined dual income. And that is like concerningly becoming the default settings of like people in my generation, and especially for millennials as well. And I think we shouldn't celebrate that.
I agree.
I'm not saying that that is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that the default settings should be that it is good to be part of a family and have one of your own.
It shouldn't be a viral TikTok that says, look at how good this is, you could have it too. I agree. And it also shouldn't be like attacking those people for making that decision. They have a right to do that.
100%.
But I think that people, maybe I'm just sentimental, but I think that people get a lot of their meaning of life out of having kids, and I say that as someone who does not have any kids right now. But like I think that is a huge, I literally think that's a part of the meaning of life. And so I, like you said, I am thinking of some friends that is the scenario, and they've talked with me about that, and I have no problem saying to them, you sure about that?
Yeah.
Like, you can feel that way when you're 40, 45?
Yeah.
You might not.
I wanna close the talk today about bringing it back to your parents, because they were there when you were making this huge shift in your life in general. Why did you think your dad believed in you at that time?
I think my parents have always believed in me, but like, sure, they're still, I'm their only kid too, which wasn't in the plans. They wanted to have a bunch, but it didn't work out. You know, they still would worry and everything. Yeah. Like, they never said like, yo, don't do this. They never said that. Mm-hmm. But like, you know, were there some times, especially at the beginning when I had 10 listeners and nothing going for me, where, you know, one of them would wander back into the studio before they went to bed, like, you know.
Why are you talking to yourself, buddy?
Have you thought about Plan B?
Yeah.
Right? Those are two very dangerous. Well, one of them's not a word, but Plan B is a very dangerous term.
Yeah.
I think I once heard Denzel Washington say, "I didn't have a Plan B because it distracts from Plan A."
Yeah.
And that is how, like, that is the risk part of my life that I'm willing to live with. Right? There's other places where sometimes I'm like, no, you need to take more risks, but in that department, it was like, I have this thing. Objectively, I know I'm talented at it. Objectively, I know I can get a lot better at it. And objectively, I know I'm going to be the best in the world at this one day. I know I'm going to have the number one show in the world. I don't know how that's going to happen, but we'll take the knocks on the way and we will figure it out. And I think my parents know that about me. They know my work ethic, and they also knew. I mean, my mom would tell you, she knew when I was first doing this, like, oh, he's good at this.
Yeah.
Like, this can work. And so I don't know. It was very, because it's not like they know social media numbers and shit like that. I had to teach all of them that. Mm-hmm. But I think they just had a belief in it. And I was really, really lucky to have that. And again, like, they literally let me do it in their house for 3.5 years before I had the financial opportunity to even move out and get my own place. You know, so like, if that's not belief in somebody, I don't know what is. And I understand, you know, for whatever reason, there are plenty of people out there listening right now who maybe don't have that luxury with their parents, and it may not come from a bad place. Parents are worried about their kids, and sometimes they'll be like, "Oh no, he'll fuck this up or something," or maybe you are trying something that like you shouldn't be trying. But if you're hitting that lane and there's something there, just like whatever that it factor is, where it's like, "Ooh, this might be it," and you have parents who support that, I don't think it gets any better than that, because it's funny. I get that type of question all the time from people like, "Yo,
Really?
what did your parents think of this whole thing?" And I'm like, "Look, dude, like it happened halfway because of them." Like, so obviously, like, am I certain that like there were nights where my mom's in bed saying to my dad like, "Oh my God, like what the fuck is he doing?" Yeah, but that was never inflicted upon me. It was always like, "Oh, so what's up next?" And like they also weren't, the weird thing was they basically weren't living at the house for most of my time there, because my mom was taking care of all my grandparents who lived an hour away down the shore, and my parents were basically living at their houses while, because my dad could work from wherever. And I very often, like my dad would be like, "So who showed up to my house today?" I'm like,
That's so funny.
"Matt Cox." "What's his story?" "He's the greatest mortgage fraudster of all time." "Oh my God." Like it got funny, but like they supported the whole thing. So I'm very, 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 very grateful for that.
Jesus. Okay, so like, I don't know, like, this is the same vein as talking about family in general, and that's why this thing is so important to me. Is I was in Anacostia a couple of days ago making a video with our mutual friend Peter. I don't know if you're friends with Peter, by the way. Peter Santinello.
I'm not friends.
Yeah.
I want to be friends with Peter. You got to hook
yeah,
that up,
yeah,
my guy.
I'll do that. I'll do that. Who's our mutual friend? Tommy. Sorry.
Tommy G's our
Tommy
friend.
G. Yeah. But no, I was there making a video with Peter, talking about Anacostia and why it is such a crime-riddled area in DC, and why it's the highest per capita crime in the Northeast, and there's no one making people don't make money there, and everything is out of whack. And he was asking me all these questions about like politics and crime per capita and this and that. And I'm like, let's start with the family. Like, let's see like what's going on in the family level. Like what's the first thing a child is witnessing? If the first thing the child is witnessing is like, and again, I don't want to overemphasize this stat because it gets thrown around a lot, but if a child is born in a house where there is no dad,
Yep.
and what are the chances of that kid's success? A lot of successful entrepreneurs are like raised by single moms, by the way, and they've done a great job. But again, we're talking about default large scale.
Large scale, right.
Like what will his life end up becoming? And
99% chance not good.
yeah, and what are the things which are surrounding him? Like, you are, at the end of the day, for good or bad, the product of your environment.
Yeah, I look, when you're an adult, you still have free will, and you got to make decisions. I don't discount, though, and I strongly empathize with, and I wish everyone would, when I see someone whose environment shaped them to sometimes be the monster that they might be sometimes. Now, that doesn't excuse what they do.
Their responsibilities.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
But, like, I want to learn from those things so that the next kid from that scenario doesn't turn into that. And we don't do that as a society. And I think your point about the single-parent households, which, it's funny, the last whole thing we were talking about is now you were getting at how that started to be integrated across all different class structures now. And how, from a socioeconomic standpoint, that is a long-term issue for society. Couldn't agree more. We need to look no farther than learn from our own mistakes with usually like the poorer people among us, the people with the least opportunity.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart to hear stories when you got like moms who work like 3 jobs a day to put food on the table, and then their kid gets into deep shit doing something when he's 17 years old, and people are like, "Where were the parents?" And I'm like, Malaka, she was working 3 jobs a day. Like, what do you want her to do? Her husband was thrown into jail for smoking a joint. Did a 10-year bid. Like, what do you want?
Anytime I watch like some of Tommy's video, who is super talented at what he does, this is something which I think about a lot. Because he does, like, when I interviewed him, we talked a lot about personal responsibilities and what these people can do to actually well, not do that in the first place and then maybe make some better decisions. But at the same time, if that's all you have been raised around and that's the osmosis, which is kind of like informing who you are as a person and what's cool and what's not and what's something to look up to, I'm in no position to tell you what to do, by the way.
That's right.
Especially, it bothers me more. It's because, like, when I was in DC and I was working in a lot of conservative circles, there was this common trope of them using what we used to get like drunk a lot in parties or whatever. And there was this common thing about talking about American Dream and all that stuff. It's like, oh, hey, look, Sagnik, he came in with no money. And like,
He's a fucking Indian.
And like he has a business and like he's doing all this. Like, why can't everybody be like this? And I'm like, what do you mean, man? Like, it's like I had the advantage of starting from zero. A lot of people start from negative,
Yeah.
right? Like starting from a blank slate, as funny as it sounds, is a privilege. Like, I came here with like nothing, but at the same time, my parents are my mom is a teacher, my dad is super educated, he's a PhD, and like education is all I had, like most Indians do, whatever. But like that, I had that. I had no money, but I had that.
You had a baseline.
I had the base foundation ready, and America just like turbocharges you.
That's right.
And it gives you the scaffolding for you to make your building.
Take my situation, right? Let's say that I'd grown up and my parents weren't like, go get a job.
Yeah.
Just that one thing, even. And they weren't like, hey, we know if you're trying in school or if you're not, right? They could tell. How would that have changed my whole life? Just those two, taking those two knobs and just turning them this way.
Yeah.
I would never be sitting here right now. I'd probably be a loser, right? So the smallest little things, it's not just all like, what's the economic situation you grew up with? That's a big part of it, for sure. But like, what's the mentality that was instilled in you, and how was it instilled in you? And statistically speaking, is it most likely to be instilled in you if you're in a stable household with two parents? Yes. Here's another example. My buddy Josh, one of my good friends from college, he's from the Bronx. The project's in the Bronx. Two parents in the house his whole life. So Josh ended up going to high school in Connecticut and doing extremely well in school, where he got to live there for 5 days a week, come home on the weekends, and then went to college, went to, get a 4-year degree, and is fucking killing it and making a ton of money in the real world. Right? And lived it because he had two parents at home who were amazing. They didn't have a lot of money, but there was a symbiosis there, to use your word. And on top of that, his mom was also a teacher at one of the local schools, literally in the project. So she had an understanding of like the baseline of education with
what
her
a
son.
kid needs. Yeah.
Yes. And so they didn't grow up with much money. They had a few other kids. They got by. I forget what his dad's job was, but it wasn't a great job. But they were there, and there was a presence. And so Josh is a great person and a successful person because of that. And some of the same kids he grew up with are in prison right now. Makes you think.
The core thing about parenting is like 90% of the job is showing up. And just like being there.
Yeah. Yeah, what was a quote I saw the other day? Like, no one ever sits on their deathbed saying they wish they worked more.
More, yeah.
Now, I do think there's a few exceptions to that, but in general, I understand that point, because it's like your kids aren't going to stand around your deathbed saying, "We wish you worked more, Dad."
What's your relationship right now with money and the future that you want to build?
So my relationship is more with ambition than money. Okay. But for the purposes of argument, I'm going to call it the same thing, because it means the same thing in how you are consumed by the chase. And I think the way I want to answer this question is what my mentality was coming into this, right? I'm a very flawed guy. I got a lot of problems. I'm definitely a very self-aware individual, though. That is a strength of mine. And maybe sometimes like I'm too hard on myself with some of that stuff. That's fair. So I can work on that. But before I did this, I never had money, but I had a really good life. I'm the social butterfly. I'm the guy like, yo, what city are we in this weekend, right? I had the problem of having way too many friends, which is an amazing problem to have. Constantly had things and places to do, places to crash, whatever. And when I went to do this, again, I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. Otherwise, I probably would have never done it. But as I was sitting alone in my parents' house during those 6 months building this podcast in silence, I didn't tell anyone about it. Like, a few people who visited my house knew, and that was it. Like, literally a bunch of my best friends didn't even know I was doing this. I was preparing my body for what I was about to embark on. And there was a girl I was talking with shortly before the pandemic I stopped talking with because like she was awesome, but like it wasn't going to be it.
Yeah.
And so as the pandemic started, I didn't have anyone obvious there who was going to be there with me. And the self-awareness came in to where I said to myself, yo, the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to be lucky to be able to build your own thing. But there is going to be a part, you have to live in reality. There's a part of that that's going to be miserable for who you are. Like, one of my love languages is quality time, which makes sense for what I do, by the way. But I also knew that was going to be sacrificed in my real life like crazy. And that was going to make me very, very unhappy. And it did. But when I made that realization, I said to myself, now is the time. I am never going to have 3 to 5 years like this again to just go all in 100%, 7 days a week, consuming my time. As I sit here 4.5 years in, I'm very conscious of where that 5-year line is and trying to limit how much far past it goes. But point being, I am never going to have the opportunity to just worry about me, not have a wife and kids that I need to worry about first as my priority, not because I have to, but because I want to.
Mm-hmm. And you should, by the way. Yeah.
And I should.
Yeah.
And so during this period, I'm going to go all in on my shit. And one of the things I need to accept is that I am probably not going to have a serious relationship at any point during this run, which has turned out to be true. And that is because anyone who has come into my life, and there's been a few, but there's not a ton of opportunities for even that to happen. I have an intense realization of this is another human being. This girl has her life and what she wants to do. And what I'm going to have to ask her to do is play second fiddle to me all the time. And one of my favorite things to look at with this, phraseology-wise, is it will be a situation where I have to make time instead of having time. And that is not fair. And so if I feel like someone, could be special or whatever, and she's there, I'm not just going to selfishly be like, yeah, be in a relationship with me and, wait it out a few more years and I'll really be able to be there with you. It's like, I don't put them through that.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe I could have there's a couple situations maybe I could have let develop a little more to see where she would be at, but like, I didn't, because I don't want someone to have to do that. Now, if someone came to me and said, Julian, I love you, and like I will do whatever it is, I don't need any attention. I want to support you 100% in what you do, and I'll sit there and fucking fold the laundry while we do it and go worry about my own career while we do it. Maybe I'd say yes to that, but I'm never going to ask someone to do that, and no one's ever offered. Not even close.
There's an opportunity cost to everything.
Yes.
Right? Most people don't realize that, and like they are mad about the fact that they have to pay that opportunity cost. You are hyper honest and super vigilant about what that cost is, and you are willing to pay it, and you were strict with yourself that now that I'm paying that cost, I better make it worth it.
That's right. 100%.
Right? So, and also like it's kind of like selfish sometimes to ask someone to kind of like bow down to your opportunity cost.
Oh, 100%.
Just because you are willing to pay, that doesn't mean that you have the right to ask someone to pay it as well.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if someone is so game with what you're building and what you're doing that they're down for the cause, it's nice, but at the same time, it's kind of scary because I've had that moments as well. It's super scary because it's like, hey, what if it doesn't work out?
It's scary, but also like I have friends who are highly ambitious who were very lucky with life such that either before they started going after their thing or somehow right when they were first going after it, they found the woman who wanted that and said, you do whatever you got to do. I'm here for it. And they're like, no, you don't have to. And they're like, no, because they found someone, and it's not to say the other girls aren't amazing, but like they found someone who was both amazing and down with it.
Yeah.
And that they didn't have to ask to do that. And when I see that, I'm like, you son of a bitch. Yeah. Like, yeah, I'm a little
so
envious
nice,
of it, but like I'm in awe of that because like I understand exactly what that would look like.
Yeah.
Exactly what that would look like for those girls. And like, good for them. That's an amazing thing. And like, you know, maybe while I'm still in this, that'll happen at some point. It hasn't, but I will say it also makes me, this is where I have my own fault. It makes me hesitant sometimes when there's some girls that I feel a good vibe with, and I'll say to myself, nah, she's nice. I don't wanna have these conversations with her.
Yeah. Men are stupid
fault.
as hell. We like self-jeopardize like all of these things. And
I
more
do
often
that.
than not, I have like seen it is that we expect it to fail. And for some reason, we are so headstrong that we feel like we don't need that. And if it happens, it's a good thing. But at the same time, we actually need that to not burn the fuck out. Because as it turns out, and you can push back here, you are 5-6 years into this, and there will be
4.5. Yeah.
As it turns out, like in a couple of years, or maybe I hope it never happens. By the way, if you don't have that system set up around you, there will be a time when you will keep questioning all of these things and keep becoming more and more self-aware. The good thing about people like you and me is that we don't need the motivation of a girl or a newborn to work our asses off. We have that in ourselves.
But but here's the thing though. I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for you on this. We do have the motivation of wanting that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no shit. Yeah.
And I have the motivation, and like, if I'm gonna be a little selfish, I have the motivation of also wanting to have good choices on that.
Yeah.
And not settling.
And not just to check a box.
And I don't just
That's
mean...
the worst thing ever.
I don't mean just pull the next hot-looking model out of the line. It's not what I mean at all.
Yeah.
There's a certain point where you're all good-looking, right? All the girls are good-looking.
Yeah.
Who are you as a person? What are you about? Like,
Yeah.
if you're going to be the mother of my kids, too, like, I'm flawed, so we need to see how
flawed you
not
are.
flawed
Yeah,
you are. like, we need to balance this shit off a little bit.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'm like, I feel like I'll be a great dad, but at the same time, like, I'm not great at telling people what to do.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting when I have a kid. Because, like, if I have a 3-year-old, like, I don't want to do that. I'll be like, okay, no problem.
Cold beans. Yeah.
You can't do that. But, no, I definitely think there's a motivation in chasing it. But to your point, there's people who they need that to be like, oh, my God, I got to get my life in order. And luckily, we didn't need that.
It's a good way to end it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
This was went all over the place in this one. It was
And
good.
that's how I wanted. I really didn't like want to like push this in any direction and talk about nerd stuff. But like only reason I wanted to do this, I just literally wanted to pick your brain because the first time we talked, it was fascinating, and just wanted to do more of it.
Well, right back at you, man. I love what you're doing. I love the hustle behind it too, because I know how busy you are on burning on both ends of the stick. But keep doing it, because like I see the success you're having in your own business as well already. Like that's gonna keep going. So
Right back to you, boss.
all right, man.
Cut.
Thank you. How was that? Good?
Yeah. How long do we go on for?